From Social Prosperity Partners, this is Community Catalysts.
All I know is that today we're not where other states are. I wish that federal agencies would kind of look at it from that perspective and think about how do we actually get Alaska to where it needs to be.
Welcome to Community Catalysts. I'm your host, Matt Lehrman. Serving in local leadership rarely comes with the luxury of predictability. Conditions change quickly, distance matters, and systems are tested not only by disagreement, but by geography, weather, and the effort it takes to help people in communities feel connected, respected, and heard. In that environment, leadership is less about control and more about judgment and endurance and shared purpose. This podcast is for leaders who recognize that reality. It's a place to slow down, to reflect, and to learn from others who are carrying the same weight while trying to serve their communities well. My guest today works alongside local leaders across the great and vast state of Alaska. He supports cities and towns that are often remote and necessarily self-reliant, yet more interconnected than they might first appear. As executive director of the Alaska Municipal League, Nils Andreassen and his team are an essential resource to civic leaders navigating uncertainty, coordinating across jurisdictions, and doing the everyday work of keeping local government functioning. And in a state that sits farther from the nation's capital than any other, relationships with the federal government are anything but abstract. They are practical, ongoing, and deeply felt at the local level. I'm especially interested in learning how leaders in that context build and sustain those relationships and what lessons might travel to communities closer to Washington, but facing their own forms of distance and complexity. Nils Andreassen, welcome to Community Catalysts.
Thank you so much, Matt. I'm glad to be here.
So everyone knows this. I'm in Scottsdale, Arizona, where we're talking in mid-February. It's in the 80s here. What's the weather like in Juneau right now?
So Juneau is 30-ish and rain with the snow in the mountains. And I was just in Anchorage yesterday and in the middle of a snowstorm. So weather varies in Alaska, but I'm fortunate right now to just have rain.
I don't make this offer to every guest that I have, but just know that you're welcome to come to Scottsdale. We have a guest room. You're welcome here anytime.
I might visit Arizona soon.
Nils, for people who just don't know Alaska, and I have to say, I have a hard time even getting my head around the vastness of it. This is a state that is larger than Texas, California, and Montana all combined, with a population of, I think, around 730,000 people, which is roughly the population of Seattle. And so those communities in your state are spread across an immense and often rugged landscape. Talk about the Alaska Municipal League and its mission to strengthen Alaska's local governments and improve the condition of communities. What does that mission mean in the state of Alaska?
I mean, I think one of the first realizations that I had when I became executive director 8 years ago is difference, right? Just how different each of our members are, the circumstances that they live and operate within. And that there's no one-size-fits-all approach at the state level or the federal. They are on their own in so many instances. And that realization, I think, opened up, not just my eyes, but how we support them, right? That AML can't structure its programs, its services, its advocacy in some kind of unified or broad approach. Like there are certain principles that we can apply, but ultimately the benefits and services that we deliver have to be tailored to fit their situation.
Are there a lot of different situations around the state of Alaska? Like how varied are we talking about?
I think there's different combinations of scenarios. And I mean, you mentioned some of the states that combine equal Alaska. I mean, we have a member, one borough government that's the size of California. Right, and has more public support, emergency response capabilities than the United States government does in that region, right? So, I mean, I think about that. I think about really different tax base structures, the ability to derive revenue from property, versus sales tax communities that don't have taxable property. They have a different approach to their revenue structure. I think about coastal communities often, and we're often delivering kind of a full service government approach. They are the community and providing all the different systems that residents and businesses rely on. A small portion of our membership is part of the road system, and that's a different circumstance. We have members somewhat unique in the nation that we have both city and county equivalent governments within the association. So some members who are cities who have very different responsibilities than other cities just outside of that borough government. So I think about all of those different combinations. It's not just rural urban. It's not just have and have nots. It's really the combination and thinking through what's the tax base, population, services required, responsibilities relevant to or related to a borough or the state or federal government, and how those all interplay. That's kind of the groupings that we think about within AML.
When you get together with your colleagues, the executive directors of other state municipal leagues, what are the kind of issues that you're facing that are just completely different from what might be found in other states?
Almost everybody has like a rural urban component. I mean, I think that everything about Alaska is its scale that's different, right? So rural urban hits differently in Alaska. And I've been able to bring some of my colleagues to kind of hub communities in rural Alaska, kind of that last link before getting to a village or very small remote community. No paved roads, maybe crumbling water and sewer infrastructure, very kind of tenuous ability to sustain themselves. And that's been eye-opening for colleagues around the country. So scale matters. I mean, I think too, I was just looking at some of the from an equity perspective or fairness, and that's not even right, but the cost differential between an urban place like Anchorage and a hub community like Nome, that is something like 150% higher cost to have a Thanksgiving dinner there. And so what does affordability look like in Alaska? And the further away, kind of the not just distance, but cost is for some of our communities. Like, how do we communicate that to federal agencies or other states whose kind of the difference between those, it's much smaller potentially. So I think about it in those terms. And those are the kinds of things that I describe to colleagues and overall just need. Where are we at? We still have communities without running water. We've got communities with crumbling schools. All of those pieces add up. And I look around a room of members who are just trying to keep the lights on, who are trying to address affordability, try to fulfill responsibilities in a very challenging environment.
I'm going to come back and we're going to explore that a little bit more, but I want to ask you a different question. One about, the culture among cities and towns in Alaska. But our listeners don't know that you had me up in Anchorage in December of 2022, and I got to address your annual conference, which was great. And I've told everyone since then. I may have mentioned to you in one of our past conversations that I was genuinely struck by how warm and glad your members were to be together. And I visited a lot of state municipal leagues all over the country. It felt different to be at your conference than it is at a lot of other conferences. And I guess I've long felt that what I observed was that when leaders live so far apart from each other, that when they have the opportunity to be together, it was special, it was precious. And I'm wondering if you see that dynamic, and does that sense of connection or reunion, does that also somehow shape the tone of how local government either works or works together in the state of Alaska?
I often kind of come back to describing us as a community of communities, right? We are a family that includes all of our cities and boroughs, all elected officials, and those governments across Alaska. It's pretty cool to be part of a community or a family like that, and it is special when they all come together. They may not be unified in circumstance or common in characteristic, but they are all doing the same job. And I think that really brings them together in special ways. Many come to our conferences, like that's their big trip into the city each year, right? And it's an opportunity for them to connect with family members or take care of some of the business that they need to. So it is a unique environment that we're able to create and contribute to.
So let's go back to talking about the dynamics of local government.
Yeah.
I remember one of the things that I learned, one of the stories that I heard when I was with you in Anchorage, I heard leaders talk about communities where all the fuel that the community needs for the winter arrives by barge while the water is still liquid. It has to get there before the ice sets in. But once that barge is there and it's frozen in, that's it. That's the supply till the spring. I talk to people in communities where travel between communities depends entirely on planes or snow machines, snowmobiles to my language, but they called them snow machines, I remember. And, in many places, there are no roads that connect towns. When local government operates with those kinds of constraints and where timing and logistics aren't just inconveniences, but they are absolute realities, survival realities, how does that shape the leadership culture and the approach of people who are in charge of local communities, whether they are elected, appointed, or serving in a staff position?
I think there's a few things. So one, you have to think into the future a little bit more, right? So you have to have long-term thinking that's planning out what does that barge cycle look like? And you have to be paying attention to the market and, purchasing at the right time. And think about how incredible that is. Like you get one shot at low-cost fuel for a year. And if the market out there is not conducive or there's not a good price or you pick the wrong time, whether prices go up or down across the nation doesn't matter. Like you get what you paid for in that one point in time. So I think that's, part of, probably contributes to the mindset as well. Like just how dependent we are on external factors and how little control we have over what markets are doing or what supply demand or supply chains look like. We only get that one element, and then we have to manage through it. So I think those are two pieces. I think the third would be, I don't know if this is opportunity cost, but there's a cost to doing business and delivering government in Alaska that's just not experienced elsewhere. High energy burden, high transportation burden means that housing, infrastructure, like anything costs more. And we're working within a federal or even state system that says, well, here's an average cost that we want to see, right? And really hard to make some of that justification when you're in a very remote community. So you feel penalized, right, by what might feel unfair in that kind of environment. So those are the kinds of things that I think feed into how elected officials operate, long-term planning, know that there's a cost, know that you've got to work extra hard to justify it, and you have, to a large extent, less control than you might in other locations.
As we were preparing for today, one of the things that you told me was that you have a favorite motto, and it is, do not inspire complacency. Tell me about that. And tell me a lesson from your career experience that taught you the importance of that.
I actually just said that line today to somebody after blowing up at a panel discussion about energy. I think we too often kind of get into a mode that's comfortable for us, right? We rely on our expertise and kind of what we know, especially organizationally. It's so easy to say, like, here's our programs, here's what we do. And actually, what I blew up about this morning in front of a large room of people is like what we end up less focused on is the difference that we're making, right? And I think that's what Alaskans need to see. Like they don't care that we've got an energy efficiency program. What they want to see is, are we making energy more affordable for them at the end of the day? And it's not that we're not doing that. We're just not telling that story very effectively. So I think it's easy to get distracted by the dollars, and instead we should be dazzled by the difference that we're making. That's kind of what I mean when I say do not inspire complacently. Like, be disruptive in moments where there's an opportunity to move something forward, right? To shift us in our thinking in some way that's meaningful. I will tell you that that came from, I think I was a dishwasher at a restaurant in Anchorage, and it's a sticky note that I put on the general manager's computer screen during a break. Like, it was like that far back in my life where I was frustrated with, oh, it'll be fine, or this is the way we're always doing it. And I'm looking for something more.
This sounds like not a uniquely Alaska situation, although the pun would be that, that complacency is kind of frozen into the geography. There are a lot of communities and a lot of leadership organizations that feel that their job is just to continue what's always been done.
Yeah.
Your take is different on that. You hope to inspire what? Innovation or advancement, or how do you think of that?
Change. Yeah, I mean, if our job is, if a mission to strengthen local government and improve the condition of communities, like me talking about programs that we're offering, like isn't really showing that, isn't making the difference. That's the difference in the lives of our members. So I want to constantly come back to what does that difference look like? How are we delivering something differently in a way that connects with people more affordably, in a way that reduces the expense or challenges that they're experiencing. We approach our membership as like there are some members where we augment capacity and some that we have to be the capacity. And like think about that as an organization that might otherwise have just been like, members are going to be members and we're just going to deliver our programs. It really, I think, for me, requires a shift in thinking toward, listen, if we're not seeing the outcomes that we're otherwise trying to get to, then we need to do things differently to get there.
What do you mean by be the capacity?
We will be local government. We will collect sales taxes. We will do planning. We will do financial systems. Like if you're a community of 70 and you have a 0.5 FTE, we will be the other 0.5 FTE. And I think other leagues and associations are thinking too about shared services that they might provide. But for me, I think we do take it really seriously. Like where there's not the ability to govern effectively or deliver services that you're responsible for, what can AML do to do that for you and with you and contribute to your own capacity within a community, right? Like we don't have to do that forever. As you develop your own systems, as we work with you, how do we hand that back when you're ready? So we just want to get the job done. We want to see conditions improve in across our membership. It was fun to look back 75 years ago to some of the initial statements made by first executive director to Congress in some of our early years, and it was the league's job was to make a material difference for the lives of our. Like I want to come back to that. I want to see a material difference in as a result of the work that we do.
Nils, I only know you in your capacity at the Alaska Municipal League, but I did go and look up your LinkedIn profile to see where you had been before. I was really interested to see that you spent, I think, 16 years at the Institute of the North, which is a policy think tank focused on Arctic and regional issues. Am I right? 16 years there?
Something like that? Sure.
So can you kind of contrast for me? Because you're talking about vision, you're talking about action. How does the work of the Alaska Municipal League in general compare to the work that's done in a think tank? And am I right in thinking that in a think tank, it is thinking, but in the Municipal League, you actually have some role and responsibility for movement and for action?
Yeah, we're a do tank at AML. Is that a thing? That would be, I'm going to work on that, Matt. That's ultimately why I moved from one organization to the other. Like, I loved the work that the Institute of the North did. We helped write Alaska's Arctic policy. We contributed to its climate policy. We worked on Arctic Council issues at an international in an international arena and with the U.S. State Department and others. I've been to all 8 Arctic nations and have friends across the world, which is like all really cool. And I think at the end of the day, what mattered most to me is helping to initiate an Arctic Mayors Forum And increasingly, like where I got in my thinking was that local mattered most. And that's where I could make the most difference. And when the opportunity to come over to AML presented itself, I jumped. And AML is different. I mean, there's all the issues are the same, right? You're talking about economic development, role of local and state and federal government, and so on. All the issues are the same. A lot of the people are the same, but the lens is what matters most within this position, where like it really is about affecting change, seeing improvements in a very granular, tangible way that you can't do at a think tank. You can't see that difference that you're making.
Let's talk about the relationship with the federal government. And just for contrast, I'm not sure if you're aware, I have an ongoing relationship with George Mason University's Schar School of Policy and Government in Northern Virginia. And once a month on the podcast, we bring on a local leader from Northern Virginia to talk about the challenges of local government there. And as you might imagine, under the current administration, the communities outside of Washington, D.C. are feeling, well, rather attacked, that their residents are largely people who work for the federal government, and they're feeling like the government is making it hard, not just for them as employees, but hard in their communities. You're as far away in the United States as one can get from Washington, D.C. And I'm curious if I could ask you to talk about how local government experiences the federal government in Alaska different from what might happen in the lower 48, and how that relationship is going right now.
I mean, I think it's worth noting that, I mean, Alaska has its name on, like, is maybe one of the few states that has its name on an executive order, right? And a few, unleashing Alaska's economic opportunity is an EO that's out there. I mean, there's special attention right now on Alaska in a way that is not unusual, but is very different than, the attention from the previous administration. There always seems to be something about Alaska that attracts a lot of federal attention. I wish that it attracted as much investment in some of those building blocks of community and economic development that we actually need. But we do, I think, kind of come back to, too often, philosophy, political ideology, or policy decisions at the federal level that have a direct impact on Alaska. And it's a yo-yo effect of shut things down versus open things up. And I think that isn't helpful for decision-making in Alaska. I think it makes things really challenging for state leaders and local leaders who are trying to kind of keep a steady line on here's where the future we think where we're going, and every few years that the landscape shifts. So I think that's part of it. We are distant from the capital, so articulating the conditions and the needs of our communities is tough without somebody from DC coming here and really knowing what that looks like, boots on the ground. I think that's where our delegation and others have been really effective, is trying to get people to Alaska so they can see conditions. It's hard. I mean, I think at the federal level, if everything's from a benefit cost ratio, or like how many people does this a project benefit? I mean, I've got a member community of 39 people, and they've got an $85 million port project. And if you're just looking at it from a benefit cost ratio, you'll almost never get to a positive number with something like that. So that's tough. I do think that federal agencies are really responsive. We've got dedicated resources often just for Alaska because of size, because of our Alaska Native, kind of the tribal component and sovereignty that is differently structured here in Alaska, because of the resource development, current and potential, and the environmental benefits that come from the state. So there's a lot to it, and I think that it's all about like getting to know the state in a way that's meaningful. Like ultimately, that's how good decisions could come from DC.
I'm going to press you on this a little bit, and I just don't know. So I hope this is not an ignorant question. Is there a difference between feeling that the federal government is there trying to help the people of Alaska have successful, vibrant, healthy, supported communities? Or is there a potential difference in that the federal government may be more oriented to the natural resources, the access to the Arctic, the proximity to Russia, all the geographic things that go along with it, which is less about people and more about assets?
Nation states are going to be nation states, right? The United States government is going to act as a sovereign, is going to think about military, is going to think about GDP. Those are the things that are its job. I think our job as Alaskans is to translate our needs into those. Like, that's the work that we do every year and in every conversation, is to say, great, so we're going to take, here's the need that we've always had or the project that has always been out there, and we will apply this new lens or filter to it so that it makes sense to you through whatever your federal priority as a nation state is. That's just it's a maybe not a lost in translation, but that's the translation that I think commonly occurs and is the work that so often we have in front of us.
You're saying it's a duality. Both of these things exist simultaneously, and that's not a bad thing. It's just the way it is.
I think it's the way it is. I mean, there's an equal footings clause, I think, in the Constitution, or it's out there, and I wish we could come back to did we really have equal footing? Do we have the same kind of base level of infrastructure that other states have or had? It's probably a losing argument. All I know is that today we're not where other states are. I wish that federal agencies would kind of look at it from that perspective and think about, how do we actually get Alaska to where it needs to be a differently contributing partner to our GDP and our nation's security, versus our nation's security and GDP and development will result in communities having a different circumstance than they do today.
Let me ask you to explain that one again. Are you saying that you wish that there was more investment in Alaska to make it productive? Or are you saying that there's more to be done in Alaska to be relevant and contributory to the rest of the country?
Investments in some of that basic infrastructure would translate into Alaskans being able to be better contributors to, the nation's economy and security.
Are we talking about roads and power plants and things like that?
Education, health, what's your social and physical infrastructure that's necessary to build an economy off of? Instead of thinking about investment in security or oil and gas development or GDP kind of related activities and a trickle-down effect that will result in education or infrastructure. And because we're just not getting there, right? We're not seeing the full benefit of what's hoped for with those other types of investment. I think just from a state perspective, that too often we think about what do we need to have in the bank for a future versus what can we invest in right now that will result in the future we want. So from Alaska's perspective, we've got a permanent fund, $80 billion there, translating oil and gas wealth into a sustainable resource and funding that comes off it each year to fund government and other types of support. Is that the goal, or should we be spending money on roads and bridges and water and sewer and lowering energy costs and lowering transportation costs, investing in workforce and development and education, and have housing and childcare? Other states see investments in those building blocks that lead to a future where there's actually economic prosperity and social prosperity. So, I think about it in those terms. I think we've got kind of a timing issue, and it might require a different way to think about, when and how to invest and in what.
I don't want to back you into a corner, and I definitely
I've
don't
done a good job digging myself into a hole.
I don't want to stereotype, but is there popular support within the state of Alaska that would welcome those kinds of investments, which would aim to bring more population, more urbanization, more connection into the state? Or is that a fraught issue regardless?
I think we want it both ways, right? Eat our cake and have our cake and eat it too. There is popular support for housing and childcare and education and health and public safety and infrastructure. And there's not public support for paying for it through our currently available means.
That sounds like a lot of places. Nils, I have a couple of last questions I want to ask you about. Look, many of our listeners serve communities that feel isolated in their own ways, even if they're not isolated on a map. From what you've seen and experienced, what helps leaders move from simply being affected by events to acting with clarity and intention, to not feeling powerless, even if they're feeling remote?
I think planning is a big element. And, maybe I'm just saying it because we're working more in this planning space. But our approach to planning is like a Kirkland brand approach. I just want plans for everybody so that they can have the tools they need to make decisions that come from community and other stakeholders. So at the rate we're going, Alaska communities will never have all the plans that even they're required to have, let alone should have. So I see planning as really a driver for change, a driver for decision making, a driver that brings people together and coalesces difference of opinion into action and opportunity and unity of purpose. And I don't buy into the whole plan on a shelf trope, because I think actually it's also iterative, right? It might take a few planning efforts to get to the thing that you want.
That's what Eisenhower said, right? It's not the plan, it's the planning.
Well, yeah, me and Eisenhower, we think the same. But so that planning process is important. And also, planning is often a checkbox that communities need to go through to get to access state and federal funding, or, right? So don't have barriers to checking a box and help to facilitate some of that planning that really brings people together. So I think that's really important to kind of counter isolation. I think it goes back to the things that we say need to mirror the lived experience of the people we serve. And that kind of helps with isolation. So AML needs to reflect an urban, roaded community in the same way but with different words for a community that's off the road system and has a community of fewer than 1,000 people. People need to see themselves represented in our work, in our philosophy, in our approach, and in the outcomes we deliver. I think that helps with isolation, right? It brings them closer to us and to each other.
It puts intentionality into it.
Yeah.
Nils, I have one last question for you, and it's a question that I ask by popular demand. Anyone who has seen me present my keynote From Conflict to Conversation knows that the very first question that I ask the audience, and they take out their phones and they start, answering this big word cloud that appears on the screen. The question that I ask is for them to fill in the blank. In my community, civic engagement most often leaves people feeling blank. And I have now asked this question for 25 state municipal leagues. I think I'm up to 14 or 15 state school boards associations. I've been to a number of county associations. I've asked this question everywhere. And whenever I ask the question, the audience feeds it in, and then I say, hey, would you like to see how this question was answered in other states? And of course they do. And of course I have my slide deck loaded with them. I save Alaska for the last that I show, because everywhere that answered the question, the big words that appear are frustrated, angry, and confused. There are positive words but the large words, frustrated, angry, and confused, it shows up everywhere. Except in Alaska, where there was a word that showed up on the screen when I asked your members this, and I save it for last because, well, it always gets a good reaction. It wasn't just frustrated, angry, and confused. In Alaska, the answer to "in my community, civic engagement most often leaves people feeling" also included the word gassy. So now I ask you the question, Nils, officially, what's your interpretation of the word gassy as the answer to that question? Were they just pulling my leg and having fun, or did it actually have some context?
Yeah, we are an oil and gas state, Matt. So unleashing Alaska's potential might leave us gassy. I think they were probably just pulling your leg. And I have a feeling I know who's responsible now that you say it. I don't know. I wish the answer were like, and I wasn't sure what your question was going to be, but love is the answer that I wanted to hear from that question. I think we so often focus on the frustration and the anger and the gas that civic engagement leaves us with. And we forget, like, oh, yeah, we also existed in a moment in time where we were brought together and we were asked to hope and think differently about our future. And we lose sight of like the good things that we envisioned as part of that civic engagement. I want to come back more to that and the heart that we so often see expressed in doing the work that we do, whether it's at the organization or community level.
I love that you put the word love as the aspiration here. Talk about a vision. That would be incredible to get people to love their local government, to cherish it and to feel that it was a really important part of their lives. That's not a Alaska unique challenge. That's a challenge for local government everywhere.
Part of the solution.
Nils Andreassen, it's been great talking to you. I thank you so much for your openness to this conversation. I also thank you for having brought me out to Anchorage. That was my first time ever to the state of Alaska, and I had a wonderful time. It made a huge impression on me, and I'm just really grateful for this conversation. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Matt. This has been great.
My thanks again to Nils Andreassen, Executive Director of the Alaska Municipal League, for such a thoughtful conversation. You know, when I attended the Alaska Municipal League conference, I was genuinely struck by the warmth among so many local leaders, and it really wasn't just surface level friendliness. It looked and felt like people who truly relished being together and who understood how precious was the opportunity to be in the same room. To be present in that moment, you could sense that time together was not assumed, it was cherished. And listening to Nils today, I find myself wondering whether that warmth reflects something even deeper, not just shared purpose, but shared consequence. In places where distance and weather and logistics are not inconveniences, but realities that shape daily life, cooperation isn't optional. Trust is not symbolic. It's necessary. And that raises a question worth sitting with. If shared imperative, even shared vulnerability, binds people together more powerfully than shared intention or aspiration alone, how do we lead in a way that cultivates urgency without waiting for crisis? How do we move beyond shared possibility and toward shared necessity before circumstances force it upon us? That's really worth thinking about. What would it take for local leaders to help their communities feel the weight of mutual responsibility, not through fear, but through clarity, so that trust is built by design rather than by disaster? Hey, if this conversation sparked an idea, raised a question, or got you thinking about your own leadership, I'd love to hear from you. Call me at 602-688-2724 and leave a message, ask a question, share a reflection, or suggest a topic that you'd like to hear explored next. I listen to every message, and your input genuinely helps shape future episodes. And if you'd be open to sharing some of the hard-earned lessons from your own leadership journey, I invite you to apply to be a guest. You'll find the podcast guest link in the show notes. Your story may help another leader see their own work more clearly as they serve their community. If you believe that our system of government depends on people staying in conversation, especially when it's hard, I also invite you to join me on Substack. You'll find my new column, Democracy Runs on Dialogue, linked in the program notes. Community Catalyst is edited by Nick Living the Dream Tantillo. Our executive producer is John Little. I'm Matt Lehrman of Social Prosperity Partners. Thanks for listening. We'll be back soon with another Community Catalyst.